I will say I've been impressed with the quality of the research booklets so far. Many of them look complete, polished, almost portfolio level. So I'm really impressed with that. Many of you have excellent in-design skills, and you're using them to make quality work, which is really going to speed up your portfolio process. So that's really nice. Okay, so I'm going to start this week with talking about a news article I read. I don't know if you're aware, but the state of Michigan, the legislators, have passed a law. It's 1 year old now. And the state police, state troopers, were interviewed for this article, and they found that most people don't even know this is a law that's in effect. And the law is you can't use your cell phone while driving. So I think that's very applicable to this class because here's the scenario. I'm confident enough that the legislators who made this law have a nice enough salary that many of them are driving cars with infotainment systems. Okay, so I want you to think about that. Is an infotainment system truly less distracting than the use of a phone? And why is it okay to use, oh, here we got somebody wanting to get in. Why is it okay to use an infotainment system while driving for navigation, but not use your phone for navigation? And so I'm hoping to have just a little bit of discussion, like, 3 minutes. Does anybody have an opinion about this? Do you think it's okay to use your phone? Do you think it's okay to use the infotainment system, etc.? All right, excellent input. Anybody else have an opinion? Have you ever seen someone texting while driving? No. No, you haven't been in that situation where you were driving a car behind someone who was texting and swerving all over the road? Okay, I've been there. Oh, please. Okay, well, I hope based on your reading for this class so far, you will have an opinion related to this topic. And I hope your opinion is infotainment systems can be safer to use while driving than a phone. I hope you really believe that because it is certainly possible for you as designers to make a system that's safer for the driver for all of these features that we're talking about music, navigation, phone, etc. than their smartphone. So, with that, let's jump over and look at the reading assignment from this week. And I just want to point out a few things. Generally, I like this article a lot. It is getting kind of old, but like he says, it's such a niche market. The material is still quite valid. So, UX UI is one big thing. We talked about this last week, but UX for vehicles is kind of unique. Again, I mentioned last week that there are no standards. There are no set resolution, color, size, whatever. Every manufacturer and maybe model will be different. Um, There's a lot of testing, yeah. Um, I'll say this: in the last 4 years, the way infotainment systems are put in cars has drastically changed. So when this article is written 2020, most manufacturers of cars would work with a third party organization to develop the screen and the infotainment system and programming. They would deliver that usually 3 years later than it was asked for. In other words, it would take them 3 years to develop, and that was the normal timeline. And then it would be delivered to the manufacturer and put into the vehicle. And thus, when you were buying a car and you looked at the infotainment system, it's brand new, it would look kind of out of date. That's why it was all done third party. But since COVID, manufacturers have now formed their own UX UI teams in house. So Ford has their own, GM has their own, etc. And some of our students our alumni are working there. And now they can turn things over quickly and they can remain better on brand, etc. So that's just kind of an interesting side factor. It says human factors. I want you to understand that term, human factors. So just in general, this really relates to the history of engineering, and I want you to think about how the human being fits into a chair. So you're designing a chair for an average adult. Is there really an average adult? There's really not. So you have to make a chair that's either adjustable or generic enough to fit almost everybody. And that practice of making sure things fit the human body is called human factors. It comes from engineering because they were the ones building furniture, cars, chairs, etc. And then it's been adapted into software. And when it got into software, first it was referred to as GUI, graphic user interface, and human factors. Those two things work together. And now the term UX UI is kind of taken over, which is fine. User experience. So if you see human factors, I want you to understand what that is and the brief history behind it. Okay, points that he makes. I think you'll agree dark mode is preferred in the car. Your text needs to be very brief. Avoid paragraphs. Your typeface needs to be very large. So 38 pixels tall, for example. The call to actions. So if something pops up, you want to keep those things minimal because they can be distracting. And then most users want these features: navigation, media, and calls. And I think that's the same now too. You want to navigate where you're going. You want to get to Spotify, your media, or some other form. And you want to take calls. And of course, in order to do that, you'd have to pair the phone as well. Okay. Icons over text. So that doesn't literally mean the icon has to be on top of the text like it is in that picture. It can be. It just means that the icon has to be larger or more dominant than the text. In other words, people are very willing to glance at an icon, know what that means, without doing any reading, and navigate their system. Okay, so I'm going to take a side note and talk to you about icons for a bit. I don't want you to come up with your own unique icons. For example, you're probably going to make an icon representing navigation. Well, generally, the navigation symbol is a pin. Sometimes parts of a map or something like that in the background. I don't want you to turn it into something else like a compass or a car on a road or something like that. That's because I want you to use what people already understand and repeat what people already understand. So your icons they communicate quickly. This is kind of strange in graphic design. Normally, if we do what other people did, related to a brand or something like that. We'd be copying, and that would be a bad thing. But when it comes to UX UI, we want to communicate with the standard symbols that are already recognized. So it becomes necessary for us if we want to create a search icon to use a magnifying glass. So think about that when you set up your icons. Okay, high contrast, yes. If we're going dark mode, the icon needs to be either light yellow or white, etc., on black. And then he talks about gestures. I try to keep this part to a minimum, so I'm not expecting you to delve deeply into gestures with your interface. If you get it to work with complex gestures such as the scrolling effect, etc., I'll be very impressed, but know that that's not required. It is a good concept and good thing to understand. And then know also that voice command isn't really the answer to everything. You would think that just being able to talk to the car and tell it, the interface, what to do would solve a lot of need for texting, and it probably does. But even that is just the fact of touching a button, talking to the computer, making a recording, and telling it what to do. That is a distraction in and of itself. And then here he talks about reachability. This is also known as the thumb zone when referring to a smartphone. In other words, with a smartphone, we reach the bottom area easily because we're normally using our phones to navigate, etc. And the easiest part is the thumb zone. That's the best place to put icons, text, etc. The same concept applies to the automotive system, and of course it's driver, it preferences the driver. So the left side is always going to be the easiest because you're driving to the left, you're reaching over, and then the farther I have to reach, these are, you put least important things over here, most important things over here. Affordances, I want you to, again, to think of affordances as clues. You're trying to hint to the viewer what these things do. Okay. And we already enforced and reinforced the concept of safety. So, okay, I think that's a good review of the reading from this week. Let's look over briefly. Let's see. Oh, I did have a couple questions about why I included features right here. I was originally looking only for a list of features. Most of you turned in a list with a description, and then in week 2, I was hoping that you would expand that, so you would, in this week, explain with 3 sentences. I think, if I remember correctly, everybody that put their features in also explained it with at least 3 sentences. So you're ahead of the game. I'm sorry for the confusion on that. I'll try to clarify it better the next time I teach this class. So thanks for your patience. Thought process. Okay. Oh, I wanted to talk to you about something you probably haven't done yet, and that's the usability test. So let's talk about usability studies in general. First, know that this could be an entire career. There are people that do nothing but usability studies for their entire career. They're called usability specialists. And what they do is they sit down individuals with the rough software and they say, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I'm going to ask you not to ask me questions along the way as I try to have you complete these tasks. And then they take notes of how the person interacts with the software. So I want you to approach it the same way. And this is something you would need to do if you are going to be a UX UI designer. Specifically, this is part of UX, user experience, where you study your software design and see how easy, how intuitive it is for someone to use. Okay, so generally, you thank the person for being a volunteer. You ask them to imagine themselves the driver of a car with an infotainment system, and then you explain you're going to ask them to complete 5 tasks using your mock-up. And then when they complete the task, they can only make choices, and they can't make any mistakes, so don't feel any pressure. And then ask them to think out loud so they can understand what the person is thinking as they try to perform these tasks. This would be a good way, for example, if they don't understand your icons and they're talking out loud, they're like, I don't know what that means. So that would help you. And then if they get lost or make a mistake, tell them they can't really make an error in this. This is just a study. So just keep them talking out loud to understand where they're at. And if they can't complete the task, again, don't ask you, the usability study professional, about what to do or what certain icons represent, because that would hurt the results of the study. All right, you can add to these questions, but the ones I'm having them do are find a gas station, show them how to pair a smartphone to the system, turn on music via the interface, lower the air temperature in the car through the interface, answer a phone call or make a phone call, and that's it. So your mock-up has to be able to at least link up to those pages and has to be interactive. If there's some of you that don't understand what I mean related to an interactive mock-up, stay online at the end of this meeting, and I'll show you some examples and tell you how you can get that done. For the person doing the semi-truck, it's generally the same, but you also have to understand the health and strength of the battery of the system. Okay. All right, so let's see. News, features, icon, usability studies. All right, is there any questions related to anything about this current week, week 2, before we look briefly at week 3? Let me go back here, make sure everybody... Oh, yes, if you're going to use InVision, I'm going to give you my account so you can get into the features that match my videos. So InVision has, they tried to become like Figma, and when they tried to become like Figma, they took away, or they hid their very best attributes, and they made it much harder to do just a regular standard mock-up. And now they're downhill, so they're just about to go under. If you want to use InVision, let me know by email. I'll give you my username and password, and then the videos will match up, or we could talk about it, and it'll make sense. Is that cool? Oh, you don't have to use InVision. It's just a system that, 7 years ago was like the thing, and now Figma's the thing. But in between that, Adobe XD was the thing. So I have a theory that people who design software user interface for a living are always going to come up with another tool, software tool, to design software user interface. So I predict in another few years there's going to be another big thing to replace Figma. I don't know if that's an AI component or what, but we just keep seeing it happen. It's gone through Sketch, Azure, InVision, XD, and now Figma. So it just keeps changing and changing. Okay, good question. Follow up with me on email and I can help with that. Any other questions related to week 2? All right, I'm going to look briefly over week 3 so you know what's coming up. And do know that week 2 is a little more challenging because you got to complete this usability study, which means you got to have a working prototype. So we're close to that. Week 3, we're going to start going into the high fidelity prototype. Now, it all depends on what you're going to use. Are you going to use Envision? Are you going to use Figma? Even you could, in theory, decide to use Figma for your mock-up tool and draw everything in Illustrator and then export it to Figma. Or you could just say, I'm going to simplify life and just draw everything, icons and all, in Figma. So some choices there for you to make. If you get stuck or anything, I'm happy to help you out. All right, so we do have a little more academic reading assignment right here. So a little more formal reading for this week, sorry, but it's the last and only one. We're going to establish a grid for your user interface. We're going to establish type standards. You might want to think about colors now too. And then we're going to go for 15 screens. And then we're going to start putting the high fidelity prototype together. I don't expect it to be functioning by the end of week 3, but you should at least get it started. And then we'll talk about icon unity, I guess, at the end of next week. Okay, let's see. So any questions about week 3? We cool with that? All right, I'll take that as a yes. I can't tell. You know, teaching online is hard because I can't tell if you're listening. I can't tell if you understand. I'm just going to accept the fact that you are completely enthralled with my message and you really enjoy this lecture.